Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Educate webinar. My name is Liana, and I'm the community manager here at Xeros. Joined with me is Sarah Nush, our senior launch account manager, who will be running today's webinar about how teams could benefit from expanding the role of their designers from really just bring them in at the end of the design process to leveraging their expertise throughout the entire content creation process. Anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A box and we will answer them at the end. But otherwise, I will pass it over to Nish to get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Liana. And hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. And if anyone has to hop early, no worries at all. We'll make sure to send the recording out afterwards. But let me quickly start by sharing my screen here. Hopefully that looks good for everyone. Perfect. So let's get into it. So just again, a quick introduction from my side. I'm Sarah Nush. I'm a pilot account manager here at Xeros. So I help teams essentially adopt and operationalize Xeros within their organizations. So in my role, I get to collaborate with all kinds of teams from marketing to creative to product. And I've seen kind of firsthand how powerful it is when we tap into each other's expertise, especially the impact of designers that they have when they're included earlier on in the process. So today's session is kind of all about that. So how designers can take on a bigger, more strategic role in shaping ideas and not just kind of bringing them to life visually. So my goal is for you to leave with just a few simple, practical takeaways that you can apply right away, whether you're a designer yourself or kind of working alongside one. So as a quick agenda for today, we're going to kind of talk through why designers matter, the impact of collaboration, and how to include designers. And then we'll end it with a really short Q&A. Perfect. So the current misperception. So designers, I think, are often seen as kind of executors at the end of the process. So whether that's, they're brought in only after strategy or content is finalized. They're kind of viewed as making things look good, and they can oftentimes be excluded from ideation or more like problem solving stages, which is really important. And none of this is, necessarily wrong, but it definitely limits what design can do because there's so much potential when designers are involved earlier, kind of helping shape what we're building and why it matters, not just kind of how it looks. And that's kind of what today's conversation is all about. So unlocking sort of that creative partnership and how oftentimes it can be really just overlooked. And having that be overlooked, it kind of really does trickle down to the end result, especially when it comes time to kind of going through feedback rounds, making iterations, which can really kind of sometimes be a bottleneck because you think you're saving time initially, but it adds up at the end. So kind of we'll talk through how to mitigate some of that. Perfect. So why designers add strategic value? And some of this might be pretty obvious in a way, but sometimes, again, it's quite often overlooked, especially from firsthand how I've seen working with different designers and even marketers and copywriters, et cetera, like at what process they're bringing in designers and how that's affecting the outcome. So we thought this would be a great time to kind of showcase what we've learned from working with different clients. And specifically areas that we've seen designers add strategic value is when there's complex ideas, right? There's always different ways that maybe a large piece of really heavy written content, like just text, how can that be displayed in a more compelling way? Or even if you're trying to tell just, one of your products, how to tell that story in a better way, it can be difficult sometimes. And how can you showcase that without it being so word heavy, for example? So being able to really help designers can help translate complex ideas into visually and more emotionally compelling stories. Like I was mentioning earlier, it really does help reduce rework. So early involvement helps at the end with any like misalignment or having to go through multiple iterations. And then really designers can think through, it really helps drive innovative solutions because sometimes, I feel like designers have such a creative outlook and they see things a lot more differently than, what sometimes we're traditionally known to create like static content, right? PDFs. You're tapping into a different part of your brain. So kind of having that perception and being able to tap into designers earlier on, they can see things that maybe we didn't even think about before. And I think when when they're brought in after the fact, it really is you're kind of rethinking and reshaping your content. And they can help with more of an intuitive user flow, a better visual story, and again, just a different perspective. Perfect. And then the impact of collaboration between teams. So as I was kind of alluding to before, it really helps with quicker turnaround times, just better communication overall, and a richer input. We recognize that, designers oftentimes have a lot on their plate, and maybe some of the reasons why they're not being able to be brought into conversations earlier is just they don't have the bandwidth. But thinking through how to kind of strategically start bringing them into conversations earlier really does kind of help free up time at the end. And it doesn't ever have to be like this big transformation in how the team is like currently creating their content creation process. It can really just be like smaller steps that you're taking, whether it's just having them be part of like one conversation earlier on, or being like, hey, we have this new initiative that we're starting. How do you think we could kind of start to think through this content? And even if it's just a really rough like wireframe, we always say in Seros, kind of the best way to start kind of ideating your content is thinking through it, whether you're just doing even like chicken scratch, handwriting out content, but thinking through it in the framework and how you want to display the content. Or it could be even a little bit next level, and it can be a little bit more of a high fidelity wireframe, kind of really bringing the ideation to pen and paper, or like using Figma, or however the team is what tools you're currently using, and just kind of thinking through, depending on what, of course, the topic is, what type of use cases it is, what format you want the content to be displayed in, you can really start to ideate and kind of maybe have that process be a little bit faster because you're already thinking about it in a way of how you want the format of the content to be displayed. So how to include designers in that process. So we kind of think through it into 4 buckets, and this is typically the conversations that we have with our clients. Their workflows typically goes into this like discovery phase, the ideation phase, the execution, and then the evaluation. So with discovery, you're kind of uncovering insights, user needs, creative approaches. It's all about also, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? What content is going to help move the needle in a certain way? What are we really trying to tell our audience? And then ideation is all about kind of brainstorming solutions, visualize what possibilities that we have based on the resources that we have. Execution, about kind of bringing ideas to life with visuals and interaction. So this is kind of the tail end of the process, right? We kind of always say, once you have your static version, you have your idea brought to life. Now, can we kind of bring it up a notch and really cue in engaging interactive elements to tell a better story and reach your audience in a new way? And especially what's nice with Seros is that the back end of it, you're also getting analytics tied to this. So how can we, as you're putting through the wireframe, think through key areas that users can be either clicking or hovering to tell a better story? And I think this particularly too with designers can think about it more strategically and be like, oh, I think this is a really good opportunity. As a designer, from what I've seen from other pieces of content, this could work really well with like maybe a carousel or a tab system, etc. And then the last phase is really evaluation. So refine based on feedback and measure impact. So being able to track, again, as I was saying, how your audience is going to be interacting with the piece. And ultimately, of course, like there's a large part of the evaluation process is other stakeholders in the organization getting their input. But I think based off of these kind of 4 typical steps that we see between discovery, ideation, execution, and evaluation, usually it's the execution evaluation part that designers get brought in, but really how can we tap a little bit more into the discovery and the ideation phase? Perfect. And then kind of shifting the team's mindset. So some ways that we've seen as we've started to have more of these conversations with our clients, some tips that have been quite impactful that we've seen firsthand from our clients mentioning is starting to invite designers to kick off meetings, really starting to ask for their input on goals and strategy and not just the visuals, and framing design as a core part of the problem solving. So, these are just some shifts that teams can start to think about implementing. And it could be anything from even inviting designers into just early brainstorming sessions, not just like delivery and checkpoints. I know a lot of times there are copywriters involved, so maybe helping co-write briefs together so everyone agrees on like what the why is before jumping into the what. And kind of treating feedback as a shared conversation and not just like a round of approvals. For example, whenever our customers are tapping into our own design resources, we always make sure to include them in conversations right from the start, because it's not just our clients will be like, oh, we want to start this project to build it out, and here you go, like this is what we want. But it's really like we want it to be collaborative, because kind of we have some expertise and knowledges that we want to make sure that we're passing along to our customers. And we want to make sure that we're helping them refine the story and not just, again, create the visuals. So the end result wasn't just, a prettier layout. It was a clearer message that resonated better with their audience. So we always want to tap into, again, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How is your current audience consuming this type of content? And how could we really make it even more impactful and take it to the next level? It's kind of that collaboration between creative and strategic thinking that makes projects at the end of the day really stand out. So just some quick win checklists. And this again is like very bite-sized, just a few things that you can think through as you're going through the process internally. But just some small steps that can be taken. So one is like, again, sharing briefs earlier with designers, involving them in at least one ideation session, asking designers like, how would you approach this problem, and seeing like what they say, if they have any ideas or things that they've seen other customers do or other designers that they've worked with, and then including design input when setting project goals. But yeah, picking one upcoming project to try on, I think is a good almost like test run. You can have, okay, we have this new project that came through, maybe bring a designer into the first planning call and just listen and ask questions. And then afterwards, you can maybe reflect as a team and think through, okay, what felt different? What do we think worked and what didn't work? It doesn't have to be this like huge process change. It's more about creating space for design to contribute strategically. So just kind of thinking through maybe like, what is your current workflow that you've seen maybe there are some bottlenecks, and how you could tap into making small tweaks that later, maybe down the line, could be, a larger workflow change for the better. But it doesn't ever have to be this like big transformation up front. Even at Seros, we always say like when we have new customers creating in Seros, it's a good analogy because we always say crawl, walk, run, right? You're never going to go from like A to Z super quickly and like immediately know how to create interactive content. But it's just taking those like micro steps that will get you to that endpoint eventually. But the same way with kind of getting designers involved, like it doesn't have to be this big transformation in how your process is right now for creating content, but maybe just slowly starting to include them in earlier conversations at the end of the day can make a big impact. So just some key takeaways, that designers bring more than visuals, they bring strategy, and collaboration leads to faster, stronger outcomes. I always like to think, and these are things that I've heard from our amazing designers at Seros, that like, we've seen strong partnerships come from curiosity and shared context. Like the more that we on the pilot account management team can tap into our amazing designers, they have so much great information and ideas that we never think about. And it really shows in like the way that they're helping solve problems for our clients, and bringing in like, again, they're kind of living and breathing this type of content every day. So the ideas are always so innovative. But kind of a key takeaway is that it doesn't have to be, again, this large transformation. You can start small, stay intentional, and small shifts can really reshape how your team at the end of the day can collaborate. And we're all solving creative problems together, and design just happens to be like one of the lenses for helping to do that. So definitely, like some of it hopefully didn't feel too repetitive, but just wanted to make it a little bit more easier to understand, okay, what are some key processes within the content creation process that we typically see our customers going through. And this is kind of like, one problem that we've seen is designers are typically only brought in towards the end. And when we've started to kind of reshape the way that current processes are going for our customers and being like, okay, I think it's a good idea to maybe start to tap in earlier, start to ideate together and collaborate. Like we've seen firsthand how much success that's brought into teams. So we just wanted to help like bring that awareness. I'm curious how different it is for other organizations or anyone that's on the call right now. If you've noticed that as well, or maybe start to put some of this into practice. But hopefully some of these thoughts and ideas can be kind of used in your day-to-day now. And we'll again include this recording and this deck for anyone that wants to kind of take a peek at it afterwards. But yeah, hopefully you were able to get something out of this webinar, and definitely let us know if you have any questions that have come up along the presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Saranish, for that super insightful session. I hope everyone can take away some new ideas for, ways you can expand the role of your designers on your teams. As always, be sure to check out Ceros Educate for all of our upcoming webinars and live events. And like we said, the recording of this webinar and the webinar deck will be available tomorrow, so you can go back, you watch it, maybe share it with the designers on your team or the other folks on your team. But again, thank you all so much for joining our webinar this week. If you have any questions later on that come up, feel free to reach out to us and we will make sure to answer your questions. But again, thank you so much, Saranish, for this great. And thank you guys all for joining. But I hope you have a great rest of your days, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks everyone so much.
Everyone. Bye all.